My landlord made a PowerPoint presentation calling me a shower terrorist and forced me to shower at 3 a.m. because the sound of running water was giving him pipe anxiety and disrupting his sleep. My landlord called an emergency tenant meeting to discuss me being a shower terrorist. It all started in the first week of moving in, when my landlord Gerald knocked on my door at 6 a.m. with his face so red I could have mistaken him for a tomato. Your shower woke me up. I apologized, feeling genuinely bad. Even bought those adhesive pads that muffle pipe sounds. Week 2, another knock. Still too loud. So I shifted to 3:45 a.m., then 3:30, then 3:15. By month 6, I was setting my alarm for 3 a.m. just to accommodate this old man's beauty sleep. Each time he'd text me these long paragraphs about water trauma and pipe anxiety. I'm not kidding, pipe anxiety. Other tenants start filing into the meeting. There's Margaret from 2A who breeds guinea pigs illegally. Tony from 3C whose girlfriend definitely lives there without being on the lease. Sarah from 5B who teaches virtual screaming therapy sessions. We're all confused. Gerald dims the lights. The first slide appears. It just says, Shower Terrorism, a presentation in blood red Comic Sans. I sink into my chair. He clicks to the next slide. It's a graph. An actual graph showing shower times versus his sleep quality over the past 8 months. There are color-coded zones. Red is unacceptable. Yellow is barely tolerable. And there's no green because apparently no shower time is actually acceptable. He's highlighting my progression from 4 a.m. to 3 a.m. with his laser pointer like he's presenting quarterly earnings. Margaret's jaw drops. Tony starts recording on his phone. As you can see, Gerald says, pushing his glasses up, Tenant 4B has engaged in systematic sleep deprivation tactics. He clicks again. Now there's audio waveforms. This man recorded my showers. Listen to this assault on human decency. He plays a recording. It sounds like water, just water running. Maybe a faint pipe gurgle. Sarah snorts. Gerald glares at her. The next slide is suggestions for shower alternatives. Number 1, Planet Fitness on 3rd Avenue. He has photos. Actual photos of the gym bathroom that he apparently took during a tour. The tiles are yellow. Not originally yellow, mind you. Just yellow now. There's visible mold in the corners. Someone left a toupee on the sink. Number 2, wet wipes. He deadass suggested I clean myself with wet wipes before a shift at a bakery where I handle food. Number 3, strategic sponge baths. I don't even know what that means and I don't want to. Margaret raises her hand. Gerald, is this why you called us here? This affects everyone. Gerald clicks frantically. New slide. Shower schedule proposal. He wants to implement building-wide shower hours. 10 a.m. to 8 p.m. only. Tony laughs out loud. Sarah mentions she's a nurse who works nights. Gerald's eye twitches. I've been more than accommodating, I finally say. Everyone turns. I've moved my shower time 8 times. I wake up at 3 a.m. to shower in the dark like some kind of goblin just so you can sleep. I bought a gym membership to that Planet Fitness. Someone was butt naked sitting on the floor biting their toenails off. Never again. Gerald's face is getting red. It's about respect for the building's acoustic environment. The building's acoustic environment? Tony chimes in. My ceiling leaked for 3 months. Margaret's guinea pigs sound like they're planning a revolution. The elevator screams like it's being murdered. But sure, let's regulate shower times. Gerald fumbles with his laptop. Wrong slide. It's his vacation photos. Quickly clicks away. Now it's a slide titled Legal Precedents. He starts reading. In Johnson versus Smith, the court found that repeated water usage at unreasonable hours constituted. That was about someone running a car wash in their apartment. Margaret interrupts. I know because I looked it up when you tried to ban my guinea pigs. The meeting devolves. Sarah's asking why Gerald lives in the basement if he's so sensitive to pipe sounds. Tony's girlfriend, who definitely doesn't live there, walks in and asks what's happening. Gerald's frantically clicking through slides trying to regain control. There's one that just says, think of the pipes, with clip art of crying plumbing. Finally, Margaret stands up. Gerald, I motion to end this meeting and formally request you soundproof your own apartment like a normal person. Seconded, everyone says in unison. Gerald's still clicking. He lands on his final slide. It's a photo of me at 3 a.m., taken through my window, holding my towel and looking dead inside. This, he says triumphantly, is the face of a shower terrorist. That's the face of someone who wakes up at 3 a.m. to accommodate an insane landlord, I say. I thought I had him beat. But the next day, I woke up to an eviction notice being slid under my door, and that's when I knew the battle had just begun. The white paper sliding under my door woke me up before my alarm even went off. I rolled out of bed and picked it up, my eyes still blurry from sleep. The words, notice to quit, jumped out at me in bold letters across the top. My hands started shaking as I read through Gerald's attempt at legal language about lease violations and disturbing the peace. The paper was dated yesterday, which meant he typed this up right after everyone told him he was being crazy at the meeting. I grabbed my phone and took photos from every angle, making sure to get the date and his signature clear in the shots. The tenant group chat lit up immediately when I sent the pictures. Margaret texted back within 2 minutes saying this wasn't even proper legal formatting and looked like something Gerald printed from a free template website. Tony's girlfriend sent a link to tenant rights organizations with a message saying we should all save this for evidence. Sarah added that she'd been recording Gerald yelling at her about her 2 a.m. post-shift showers for months now and had a whole folder of recordings on her phone. My stomach churned as I sat at my kitchen table with my laptop, eating yesterday's stale donuts from the bakery while Googling tenant lawyers. Most of them wanted consultation fees of $300 just to talk, which was money I didn't have after paying for that stupid gym membership Gerald made me get. I finally found a legal aid number that offered free intake appointments, but the earliest slot was next week. That afternoon, I decided to try talking to Gerald like adults, so I walked down to his basement door and knocked. He answered wearing a sleep mask pushed up on his forehead like some kind of weird headband. Before I could even speak, he launched into this whole speech about acoustic terrorism and how I was destroying his circadian rhythms with my shower schedule. I kept my phone recording in my pocket the whole time as he ranted about water trauma and pipe vibrations traveling through the building's infrastructure. The next morning, I dragged myself to my 4 a.m. bakery shift, running on maybe 3 hours of sleep because I'd been up reading tenant law websites. My hands shook while I was frosting cupcakes, and Roy noticed right away, asking if everything everything was okay. When I told him about the eviction notice and the whole shower situation, he just shook his head and said he needed reliable workers who could focus on their jobs. After my shift, I stopped at the hardware store and downloaded a decibel meter app on my phone. That night at 3 a.m., I measured my shower at exactly 42 decibels, which is quieter than a library. For comparison, I measured the elevator grinding and screeching at 78 decibels, and someone's TV through the wall at 65 decibels. I made a whole spreadsheet with timestamps and readings from different spots in the building. Margaret showed up at my door the next evening with a cardboard box full of papers she'd printed at the library. She spread them out on my coffee table, showing me cases where landlords got fined for harassment, and one where a tenant won $10,000 in damages for sleep deprivation caused by unnecessary complaints. We spent 2 hours going through everything with a highlighter, marking the parts that matched our situation. Tony knocked on my door later that week with his phone out, showing me pictures he'd taken of Gerald photographing him and his girlfriend from the basement window. Turns out Gerald had been documenting everyone coming and going from the building for months, taking pictures of us like some kind of creepy private investigator. We realized he was building files on all of us, not just me, probably looking for any excuse to raise rent or kick people out. The tenant group chat exploded when Sarah posted screenshots of city housing codes she'd found online. According to the official regulations, you can't have a legal bedroom right next to the boiler room because of carbon monoxide risks and fire safety rules. Gerald's whole basement setup was completely illegal, which suddenly made his pipe anxiety make way more sense since he was literally sleeping inches away from them. I called 311 to report the housing code violations, but they transferred me 3 times before someone finally took my complaint. The person on the phone said an inspector would come within 30 days, which felt completely useless when I had an eviction notice sitting on my counter right now. I filed the complaint anyway and wrote down the reference number on a sticky note. Margaret started organizing the other tenants, creating a shared document where everyone could add their Gerald stories and evidence. Tony added photos of the ceiling leak that went unfixed for 3 months, while Gerald complained about water sounds. Sarah uploaded her recordings of Gerald banging on her door at 2 a.m., telling her that her post-shift showers were giving him PTSD. Even the quiet couple from 3B added a note about Gerald entering their apartment without notice to check the pipes while they were at work. The evidence kept piling up, painting a picture of a landlord who was more interested in controlling every aspect of our lives than actually maintaining the building. I'm fascinated by how Gerald made actual graphs and audio recordings of shower sounds. How long did he spend making those slides? The way he photographed everyone through windows makes me wonder what started this weird obsession with controlling everything in the building. Tony pulled out his phone during our hallway meeting and started typing right there. He said we needed to track everything with timestamps and proof. Within 10 minutes, he had a shared Google Docs set up and sent the link to everyone's phones. Margaret added the first entry about Gerald entering her apartment without warning last month. Sarah typed about him calling her at midnight to complain about her walking too loud. The quiet couple from 3B wrote about finding Gerald in their kitchen when they came home early from work. By the next morning, we had 20 entries. By that evening, we had 43. Gerald must have noticed us talking more because the next day, a laminated sign appeared in the hallway. Big red letters said, "Shower hours 10 a.m. to 8 p.m. only," with his signature at the bottom. Margaret walked by, stopped, and just ripped it right off the wall. She folded it up and put it in her purse for our evidence folder. An hour later, Gerald put up another one. Alice from 3B took that one down too. He kept putting them up and we kept taking them down. I finally got my legal aid appointment 3 days later. The office was in a strip mall between a nail salon and a tax place. Denise Mahoney looked at my eviction notice and actually started laughing. She pointed at the paper and explained it wasn't even legally formatted. There was no court filing number, which meant Gerald just typed it up himself and thought it would work. She agreed to take my case and started typing up a cease and desist letter right there while I watched. The letter went out the next day, and Gerald got it 2 days after that. Denise wrote that his eviction notice was invalid and his harassment had to stop immediately. She requested mediation through the city's housing dispute program and mentioned potential damages for harassment and illegal surveillance. She specifically noted the photo he took of me through my window at 3 a.m. 2 days later, I noticed something new in the hallway when I got home from work. A camera was mounted on the wall pointing directly at my door. It was one of those obvious fake ones from the dollar store with a blinking red light that ran on batteries. The message was clear though. I took photos from every angle and texted them to Denise. She added them to our harassment file and said to keep documenting everything. Ralph Mercier from City Housing finally showed up the following week. He spent 3 hours going through the whole building with a clipboard and a camera. He found 17 violations, including Gerald's illegal basement bedroom that didn't have proper windows for fire escape. The elevator that had been temporarily out of service for 2 years was another violation. Gerald followed him around the whole time, making excuses about permits being in process and repairs scheduled for next month. Ralph just kept writing on his clipboard and taking photos. The next day at the bakery, Roy called me into his office. He said I seemed distracted lately and needed to focus more on my work. He was cutting my hours, taking away my Tuesday and Thursday shifts. That meant I was losing almost $300 a week. The timing wasn't a coincidence since Gerald's nephew worked at the same bakery in shipping. I couldn't prove anything, but losing those shifts meant I'd be short on rent. The irony of maybe not affording rent while fighting an illegal eviction wasn't lost on me. Alice organized a tenant meeting that weekend in her apartment. We elected her as president of our new tenant association and voted to withhold rent until repairs were made. Denise warned us about the risks when Alice called her on speaker, but helped us set up an escrow account to show good faith. We'd deposit our rent there instead of paying Gerald directly. Strange things started happening after that. My hot water would cut out every night at exactly 11 p.m. Sarah's electricity would flicker whenever she turned on her TV. The couple from 3B lost heat for 3 hours every morning. Tony set up a camera pointing at the basement door, and we watched the footage together on his laptop. There was Gerald at 10:55 p.m. walking into the utility room with a flashlight. 5 minutes later, my hot water was gone. The next morning, Tony's camera showed him going back down at 5 a.m., right before the heat came back on for 3B. I went to the hardware store and bought a cheap shower head with a built-in built-in shutoff valve and rubber gaskets for the pipes. The guy at the store said it would make my shower almost silent. I installed it that night and tested it at 3 a.m. You could barely hear the water running even with your ear against the wall. But Gerald still texted me 20 minutes later, complaining about the noise disrupting his sleep. I kept the receipt for the shower head and the installation instructions. I photographed his text message and forwarded everything to Denise. She said to keep saving everything because we were building a strong case. Gerald didn't know it yet, but every text, every fake camera, every utility shutdown was just giving us more ammunition. The escrow account was growing with everyone's rent money, and Ralph's inspection report was due any day. We were ready for whatever came next. 2 days later, my phone rang while I was kneading dough at the bakery. The number wasn't saved, but the area code looked local. I wiped flour off my hands and answered. The woman on the other end introduced herself as Charlotte DuPont from the property management company. Her voice was tight and professional, but I could hear stress underneath. She said someone had posted a video of Gerald's presentation online, and it was getting attention. She wanted to meet immediately to discuss the situation. I told her I'd only meet if my lawyer Denise could come. Charlotte paused for a long moment, then agreed to meet us at a coffee shop downtown the next morning. After hanging up, I checked Twitter on my break. Tony had posted the whole shower terrorism PowerPoint with the caption, "My landlord made a whole presentation about shower crimes." The tweet had 12,000 likes already. People were making memes out of Gerald's crying pipe clip art. Someone had turned the graph into a shirt design. The comments were brutal. The next morning, Denise met me outside the coffee shop wearing her serious lawyer outfit. Charlotte was already inside at a corner table with a folder and 2 cups of untouched coffee. She stood when we walked in and her handshake was quick and nervous. Before we even sat down, she opened the folder and pushed papers toward me. The header said, "Confidentiality and Release Agreement." Denise picked it up and started reading while Charlotte talked fast about reputation management and moving forward positively. The agreement basically said I wouldn't post anything online about Gerald or the building in exchange for some vague promise to address concerns. Denise set the papers down and looked Charlotte straight in the eye. She said we weren't signing anything and started listing demands. Gerald needed to be removed as building manager. The building violations needed immediate repairs. The illegal eviction attempts had to stop. Charlotte's face got paler with each point. She kept saying she'd consider our position and consult with upper management. We left without signing anything. That afternoon, Gerald called me directly, which surprised me since we'd been communicating through lawyers. His voice sounded different, tired and shaky. He started talking about how he hadn't slept well in 3 years because of the pipes. Every drip and gurgle reminded him of a flood that destroyed his childhood home. He described nightmares about water rising through the floors. For a second, I actually felt bad for him. Then he called me a shower terrorist again and demanded I admit I was doing this on purpose. I hung up. 3 days later, Ralph showed up at the building with official paperwork. He gathered all the tenants in the lobby and read from his clipboard. The building had 30 days to fix 12 major violations, including exposed wiring, mold remediation, and fire escape repairs. Then he turned to Gerald, who was standing in the corner turning red. Ralph said the basement wasn't legally zoned for residential use. Gerald would need to find legal housing within 2 weeks. Gerald's face went from red to purple. He started yelling about tenant conspiracies and how we'd all orchestrated this attack. Ralph just kept writing on his clipboard while Gerald ranted about shower terrorism and persecution. That night, I found another notice under my door. This one claimed I owed $50 for excessive hallway moisture from wet footprints. The letterhead looked exactly like the fake eviction notice with the same wonky formatting. I took a photo and added it to my harassment folder, which was getting so thick the manila folder could barely close. The next morning, Tony knocked on my door grinning. He showed me his phone where his TikTok of Gerald's presentation had 50,000 views. He'd added funny commentary over each slide, and people were losing it in the comments. Someone had started a hashtag shower terrorism that was trending locally. News outlets were picking it up. A reporter from Channel 7 had messaged Tony wanting an interview. Within hours, Charlotte was emailing me directly instead of going through Denise. The subject line said, "Urgent resolution opportunity." She offered 3 months free rent if we could put this behind us quietly. No admission of wrongdoing, but immediate action on repairs. The email had a desperate tone like someone whose boss was breathing down their neck. I forwarded it to Denise without responding. Denise called me within minutes. She said not to respond to any direct communication from Charlotte or anyone from the management company. Everything needed to go through her now. She also warned me not to post anything online myself. Internet points felt good, but we needed admissible evidence for court, not viral videos. This is it, the moment everything shifts. Gerald's world is crumbling as every single move he makes becomes evidence against him. The tenants have turned from victims into warriors, and watching them organize with such precision gives me chills. Watching Gerald get roasted online felt like justice, but Denise was right. I agreed to stay quiet online, even though every fiber of me wanted to add my own commentary. 2 mornings later, I found an anonymous note under my door. The handwriting looked familiar, the same weird slanted letters from Gerald's maintenance notices. It said to stop making trouble or I'd regret it. No signature, but the paper smelled like the musty basement. I called the police non-emergency line and filed a report. The officer who came seemed bored until I showed him my 3-inch thick folder of harassment documentation. He took photos of everything and gave me a case number. The next day, a locksmith van pulled up outside the building. The guy had a work order to change the basement lock for security purposes. Margaret saw him first and called everyone down. We blocked the basement door and demanded to see proper documentation. The locksmith admitted Gerald had called him directly and paid cash. He didn't have any official work order from the management company. Tony filmed the whole thing while we sent the locksmith away empty-handed. The next morning, I dragged myself to the bakery at 2:45 a.m. since my alarm was still set for my usual pre-shower wake-up time. My coworker Lisa saw my face and immediately told me to go home and sleep. She said she'd cover my shift and wouldn't tell the boss. I almost started crying right there behind the counter. I went home and slept until noon for the first time in 6 months. When I woke up, I grabbed a box of the fancy pastries we only make on weekends and brought them to Lisa's apartment. She opened the door and just hugged me while I stood there holding the box and trying not to completely break down from exhaustion. 2 days later, Alice called an emergency tenant meeting where we drafted a formal demand letter to the management company. The letter required immediate soundproofing of all water pipes, establishment of clear, quiet hours that respected all work work schedules, and Gerald's compliance with standard housing codes. Alice printed it on official tenant association letterhead she'd made at the copy shop. Tony said he'd record the delivery for evidence. We all walked down to the basement together, and Alice knocked on Gerald's door. He opened it wearing a bathrobe and holding a clipboard with more shower time charts. Alice held out the letter, but Gerald crossed his arms and refused to take it. She placed it on the ground by his door, and Tony got a clear shot of it sitting there. Alice took photos from 3 different angles showing the letter, the door number, and the timestamp on her phone. Gerald slammed the door so hard the walls shook. Charlotte from the management company showed up the next day with a proposal. She said they'd pay for half the pipe insulation if tenants covered the other half through a special assessment. We spent 2 hours in the community room arguing about it. Margaret said she couldn't afford an extra $300 this month. Tony's girlfriend, who definitely wasn't supposed to be living there, pointed out that the building should pay for all of it since they'd ignored the problem for years. Sarah pulled up rental laws on her phone, showing that habitability issues were the landlord's responsibility. We voted to table the decision until we could get legal advice. I spent that night looking up lawyers and thinking about starting a GoFundMe to cover legal fees and maybe moving costs if things got worse. The shame of asking strangers for money made my stomach hurt, but I was running out of options. Sarah texted me suggesting we could raise money for the whole tenant association's legal battle instead of just my situation. She said people love supporting groups fighting bad landlords. I stared at my phone for an hour trying to decide if my pride was worth more than getting out of this nightmare. Our next tenant meeting was supposed to be private, but Gerald showed up anyway carrying a briefcase and looking defensive. Sarah had prepared something special. She pulled out her laptop and connected it to Margaret's TV. The first slide showed decibel readings from my 3 a.m. shower compared to normal city sounds. My shower registered at 42 decibels, while the garbage truck at 5 a.m. hit 78 decibels. Gerald immediately said her phone app wasn't scientifically calibrated. Sarah clicked to the next slide showing she'd borrowed an actual sound meter from her friend who worked in construction. The data was even more clear with professional equipment. My shower was quieter than the refrigerator humming in the community room. Gerald's face turned red and he started yelling about how we didn't understand water acoustics. Alice had to bang on the table 3 times to restore order. Sarah kept going with her presentation, showing a full week of building noise measurements. The elevator hit 85 decibels every time someone used it. Tony's music practice barely registered through the walls at 38 decibels. The street traffic outside averaged 70 decibels all day long. My 3 a.m. shower was literally the quietest regular sound in the entire building. Gerald tried to argue that water sounds were different and more disturbing, but nobody was buying it anymore. People actually started clapping when Sarah finished. 3 weeks later, we finally got our mediation appointment with someone named Marilyn Sloan from the Housing Dispute Resolution Center. She wore a gray suit and had this calm way of talking that made everyone settle down. She proposed initial terms that seemed reasonable to everyone except Gerald. The building would soundproof the basement apartment at no cost to Gerald. All tenants could use water facilities 24 hours a day for hygiene needs, and clear conduct rules would be established for both landlords and tenants. Gerald objected to every single point. He said soundproofing would damage the historical character of the basement. He claimed unlimited water access would bankrupt the building. He insisted the current conduct rules were sufficient, even though there weren't any written rules at all. Marilyn took notes the whole time he ranted, occasionally raising her eyebrows but staying professional. During the second mediation session, things got weird. Gerald was explaining why he needed to monitor water usage when he accidentally mentioned he'd been sleeping in the laundry room instead of his apartment. Marilyn stopped writing and looked up. Charlotte's mouth fell open. Even Tony stopped recording for a second. Gerald tried to backtrack, but it was too late. He admitted he'd moved a cot next to the main water pipe to monitor for leaks and unusual usage patterns. He said it was for safety monitoring and building protection. Marilyn asked how long this had been going on. Gerald mumbled something about 6 months, the same amount of time I'd been living there and showering at increasingly insane hours. Marilyn wrote several pages of notes after that revelation. Denise from the tenant association had been quiet through all of this, but she'd been busy. She filed a formal harassment claim and repair petition with housing court. The papers got served to Charlotte at the management company office. Suddenly, Charlotte became very cooperative. She called an emergency meeting with her supervisors about what she kept calling the Gerald situation. She promised immediate action and asked if we'd consider settling outside of court. We said we'd think about it, but Denise kept the court date. The clerk scheduled our hearing for 6 weeks out because of case backlog. 6 weeks felt like forever when I was still waking up at 3 a.m. and dealing with Gerald's daily complaints. I marked the date on my calendar with a red circle and tried to keep living normally. I went to work, came home, showered at 3 a.m. and counted down the days. Every night I'd cross off another day and tell myself I just had to make it a little bit longer. The problem was that things got worse before they got better. 3 days into the wait, I overslept after spending most of the night recording Gerald banging on pipes at 2 a.m. with a wrench. I'd set up my phone to capture the sounds and filled out another incident report for Denise while Gerald clanged away in the basement. By the time I finished documenting everything and finally fell asleep, my alarm had been going off for 20 minutes. I threw on my work clothes and ran to the bakery, but Roy was already standing at the front counter with his arms crossed. He handed me a yellow paper without saying anything. Written warning for tardiness. Third strike meant termination. I couldn't lose this job on top of everything else. The stress was making my hands shake while I mixed dough and I kept dropping things. Roy watched me from his office and wrote notes on a clipboard. I started showering at 4 a.m. again, even though it killed me to give Gerald that win. My alarm went off at 3:30 every morning, so I could be ready for work by 5. I kept a notebook by my bed and wrote down every single accommodation I made. Date, time, reason. The judge would see how reasonable I was being. Gerald still complained, but now it was about the aggressive water pressure and the hostile soap bubbles. I'm not making that up. He actually wrote hostile soap bubbles in a text. At 4:17 a.m., 2 weeks into waiting for court, something unexpected happened. Charlotte from building management sent an email to everyone in the building. The subject line said, regarding recent tenant concerns. She wrote that management had reviewed multiple complaints about harassment and intimidation tactics. Without naming Gerald directly, she outlined that any further documented documented incidents of tenant harassment would result in immediate lease review. She mentioned legal liability and property damage from unauthorized basement modifications. Gerald's makeshift bedroom in the utility room was definitely not up to code. For the first time since this started, management was actually doing something. Gerald sleeping next to the water pipes for 6 months really takes keeping tabs on your tenants to a whole new level. Imagine choosing pipe noise over your actual bed just to monitor someone's shower schedule. The other tenants started talking in the hallway about their own problems with Gerald. Tony mentioned the time Gerald tried to ban him from using the front door after 9 p.m. Sarah talked about Gerald measuring her grocery bags to make sure she wasn't overloading the stairs. We were all dealing with this. The court date arrived and then immediately got pushed back. The clerk called the morning we were supposed to appear and said the judge had an emergency. New date in 3 weeks. 9 total weeks of waiting while Gerald kept being Gerald. He'd moved out of the basement after Charlotte's email, but now lived in the empty unit on the second floor. He still heard my shower through the ceiling and still texted complaints. Meanwhile, management finally scheduled the soundproofing they'd been promising for years. Workers would come on Saturday to install pipe dampeners and insulation in the walls. They said it would take the whole weekend and create a lot of dust. I packed a bag and asked Alice if I could crash at her place. She lived in a normal building with normal neighbors who didn't care when people showered. The construction crew showed up at 7 a.m. Saturday with drills and saws. They cut holes in the walls to access the pipes, and the dust went everywhere. My allergies went crazy just from being in the building for 5 minutes to grab extra clothes. Alice made me tea while I sat on her couch sneezing. We watched movies and joked about starting a support group for people who survived PowerPoint presentations about their shower habits. She said we could call it Shower Survivors Anonymous and make our own slides about recovering from Comic Sans trauma. I stayed 2 nights while they finished the work. When I finally went back, the building looked like a construction zone, but the pipes were wrapped in special foam. I tested the shower at midnight just to see. It was actually quiet. You could barely hear the water running even if you pressed your ear to the wall. Gerald still complained though. He sent a text saying the water energy was disturbing his sleep, not the sound, the energy. He'd moved his whole bedroom setup to the opposite side of his apartment, but claimed he could still feel the aquatic vibrations. Old habits are hard to break, I guess. The mediation happened a week before the rescheduled court date. Denise suggested we try it to avoid the actual hearing. We sat in a conference room while a mediator went through everyone's concerns. After 3 hours of back and forth, we actually reached an agreement. Gerald couldn't harass me about shower times anymore. I got full access to the building for normal repairs and maintenance. The lease confirmed 24/7 shower rights with reasonable use, which meant not running it for 6 hours straight or something crazy. Gerald had to stay out of the laundry room when other tenants were using it. Management agreed to provide white noise machines for anyone who wanted them. It wasn't perfect, but it was something. The legal aid lawyer kept my costs super low, but I still needed to make up for all the hours I'd lost dealing with this mess. I picked up weekend shifts at another bakery across town. Friday through Sunday, I worked at my regular place. Then Saturday and Sunday afternoons at the second location. The exhaustion was real, but at least now I was tired from actual work instead of waking up at 3 a.m. to accommodate a crazy landlord. The TikTok video Sarah posted during the meeting had gotten 2 million views, but people moved on to other drama within a week. Local news stopped calling. The internet's attention span is pretty short, but something good came from it because a tenant union reached out with resources and information about our rights. They sent pamphlets and connected us with other buildings dealing with similar issues. The viral moment was over, but the real organizing work was just beginning. 2 weeks later, the apartment next to mine finally got rented, and I watched this guy hauling boxes up the stairs all afternoon. He looked about my age and had one of those expensive smoothie blenders that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget. That first night at 11 p.m., I heard it whirring through the wall and making this grinding noise like someone was trying to blend rocks. The sound went on for 15 minutes straight. I put my ear to the wall and could hear him dumping ice cubes in and starting it up again. The next morning, Gerald was already in the hallway when I left for work, and his face had that familiar red color. He started complaining about the new guy before I even said hello. I just nodded and kept walking while he followed me down the stairs, talking about noise violations and proper kitchen hours. Margaret passed us on her way up, and we made eye contact for half a second. She rolled her eyes so hard I thought they might fall out. Tony was checking his mail and heard Gerald's whole rant about the blender. He coughed to cover up his laugh. The new tenant kept using his blender every night around the same time, and Gerald kept complaining to anyone who would listen. We all just let him talk and went about our business. My lease renewal came in the mail 3 days later, and I opened it standing right there in the lobby. The rent was going up 3%, which was exactly what the law allowed. No crazy increase or hidden fees or anything weird, just the standard bump that happens every year. I did the math on my phone, and it came out to $42 more per month. Not terrible, but not great either when you're already stretching every paycheck. I had to decide if I wanted to sign for another year or start looking for a new place. The thought of moving made my stomach hurt, but the thought of dealing with Gerald for another 12 months wasn't much better. I folded the paper and stuck it in my pocket. That night, I pulled out an old shoebox from under my bed and wrote "Moving Fund" on it with a Sharpie. I started going through my closet and pulling out stuff I never wore anymore. Old jackets and shoes and random things I'd bought and forgotten about. I took photos of everything and posted them online for sale. The bakery manager asked if anyone wanted extra shifts the next day, and my hand shot up before she even finished talking. I picked up 3 extra morning shifts that week and 2 more the week after. My feet hurt constantly, and I smelled like bread even after showering, but the envelope in the shoebox was getting thicker. I sold my old laptop for $80 and a leather jacket I'd worn twice for $50. Every dollar went straight into the box. I calculated that if I kept this pace for 6 months, I'd have enough for first month, last month, and security deposit somewhere else. It wasn't fair that I had to leave when Gerald was the problem, but sometimes you have to pick your battles. At 3:30 a.m., my alarm went off like always, and I dragged myself to the shower. I could hear the white noise machine humming from Gerald's apartment below as the water warmed up. I took my usual 10-minute shower and waited for the knock that always came. Nothing, just the white noise and the sound of pipes settling. I got dressed and ready for work in the dark like I'd done hundreds of times before. Before leaving, I grabbed my notebook and wrote down the shower time like I'd been doing for months now. The law log was getting pretty thick with dates and times and little notes about Gerald's complaints. I set my alarm for my shift and noticed the moving fund envelope had another $20 in it from yesterday's sales. The battle might be over, but at least I knew what my rights were now and had the tenant union's number saved in my phone. What a ride that was. I've really loved exploring all these questions and possibilities with you. Thanks for letting me share a bit of my curiosity along the way. If you made it to the end, drop a comment. I love reading all your comments.